what I want to talk with you all about here for a little bit is how Jesus shows us that it's okay to be angry. Jesus shows us in the story that it is okay to be angry. But the important thing is for us to learn to be angry about the right thing. Now, whenever the subject of anger comes up, I have to talk about the Incredible Hulk. And you all know why. Now, I grew up watching The Incredible Hulk, and I'm sure you all did too. You know, the TV show starring Bill Bixby as Dr. David Banner and the great Lou Ferrigno as the Incredible Hulk. And we loved watching that series, right? Because we were always waiting, every single episode, for Dr. Banner to say, "Don't make me angry." How did he finish that? He wouldn't like me if I'm angry. Because when Dr. Banner said that, we knew that the Hulk was on his way, right? Now, what I find interesting looking back on it is that even though it was anger that triggered this giant Hulk, and of course, for those of you who know the Hulk from the Avengers, it's still the same thing. When Dr. Banner gets angry, he becomes the Incredible Hulk. But even though this monster comes out because of this anger, wasn't it always fascinating how the Hulk always saved the day? That somehow that anger that transformed him into the Hulk, it always ended up working out okay. That anger somehow ended up being good. So it got me thinking about, sometimes we talk about anger being a bad thing, but is there a way for anger to be used for the good? Because in this passage, Jesus, he was angry, and I'll come back to that. But he was also doing a good thing for the temple, but also for many others. I would say, and I guess you'd have to ask my wife if I'm right, I'm not really an angry person. I don't get angry about a lot of things, but I will tell you that when I do get angry, I don't like myself. You know, anger has a tendency of bringing out the worst of us. And we say things in a moment of anger, or we do things in a moment of anger that, you know, we can't put back in a box. So maybe that's partly why I try not to get too angry. Many of you all know the story of my great-grandfather. The short version is my great-grandfather got angry over a sum of money, and he ended up killing someone. And I think that has always made an impression on me, knowing that that's part of my family's story. And that's an illustration of how, when you're angry, you know, it can bring out the worst in you. I think there's a spectrum when it comes to anger. You know, I've got my Hulk inside of me, and very few people have seen it. But it is there. And you all have that Hulk inside of you as well. Anger is one of the emotions that we have. I want to say, and I didn't do any really study on this, but from my observation, I think there's a spectrum of anger. So there are people I think that I fall in the category of that we don't get angry. I like to use the word I get frustrated a lot, but I try not to let that frustration boil over into anger. But it doesn't take a lot to press my buttons. And I don't find myself getting angry over every little thing. Now, that comes with its disadvantages. You know, I'm not saying that this is better at all on this end of the spectrum, because I find that the disadvantage in this is that sometimes people like me, we let people walk all over us, and people think that they can sort of maybe bully us because we're not going to get angry. The other disadvantage I see is maybe I don't get angry about things that I should. Or maybe I don't take up some battles that I should because I'm so afraid of being angry. So that's one end of the spectrum with its disadvantages. The other end of the spectrum is I think there are people who get angry about everything. You know, we all have people in our lives maybe that we know who are like this, that everything makes them angry. It doesn't take much to push their buttons, right? To get them to fly off the handle. And the disadvantage of this is that people end up being angry about every single little thing that happens. When really you should just reserve that anger for the big things in life. So when the big things come along, you should be angry about this group. You spend a lot of time just being angry about everything. Not realistic, I think those are the two poles. We all find ourselves somewhere here. Even I think I find somewhere here. That there are things in our life that make us upset. I think I'm going to start shifting my language because I'm going to be more comfortable talking about things that upset me. But that's just me copping out of saying things that make me a little angry. But how can we learn from this story today about, this anger that we have that's an emotion of ours, that we can use for the good, that we can learn not to get angry at every little thing that happens, but reserve that anger for what you might call righteous indignation, which is, I believe, what Jesus shows us in the temple. So what made Jesus so angry that day in the temple? What can we learn from his anger? This is the closest that we have in all the Gospels of Jesus losing. Jesus flipping out and getting mad. Because if you think about it, in all the other stories, Jesus gets frustrated with his disciples. He gets frustrated enough that he refers to them, his pet name for them is ye of little faith. He gets frustrated when they don't understand what he's talking about. We talked about the transfiguration story. Jesus got frustrated with his disciples at the bottom of the mountain because they didn't have the faith to heal people as he had taught them to do. Jesus got frustrated with hypocrites. We talked about that several weeks ago. That hypocrites frustrated Jesus because they said one thing and taught people to do certain things for righteousness, but they didn't choose to do it themselves. And we have only to look to this cross when we're talking about Jesus' anger, is because in the story we'll read in Holy Week, people lied about him, he didn't get angry. People accused him of false things, he didn't get angry. When it came to the cross, the Bible tells us that like a sheep, he was led to the slaughter. Or in the old spiritual, it reminds us that he never said a mumbling word to his cross. So I find it interesting that this Jesus, who maybe got frustrated with people, but when it came to his very life and unjustly being crucified, he really never got angry about that. Closest thing we have to anger is what he saw when he came into the temple and how he responded to it. So what was it that made him so angry that day? Well, first he was angry that his father's house had become a marketplace. Now, the practice of selling animals and exchanging coins started out innocently enough. So in the first century, the high holy days, like Passover, were a big time for people to all come to the temple in Jerusalem. And after the exile, the Jewish people had scattered out all over the region. But they all sort of had this requirement, or it was a requirement to come to the temple on Passover. So many of these people were coming from long distances. And so this practice of selling animals and exchanging coins, it had started out for their convenience. And it actually started in a market that they set up on the Mount of Olives. So the idea was that instead of making people haul animals across the long journey or making sure that they had the right coin to give for the offering, the establishment, as it were, in Jerusalem provided an opportunity that people could come, they could buy the animals they needed for the sacrifice and exchange the coins that they needed for the offering. So it had good intentions, right? What is it that happens when the best intentions of ours go on for a little bit as they become to be institutionalized. So what had happened to this practice that was really offered as a convenience, people who were traveling a long way, is that it shifted from the Mount of Olives right there into the temple, and I'll talk about exactly where in just a minute, but it had become a literal marketplace. So because of the convenience, because people knew that people were bringing animals of their own, they marked up the price and they inflated the exchange rates, all for the sake of convenience. The best way I can describe this for you is the cost of soft drinks at movie theaters and baseball caps. So it's a situation, they don't let you bring your own food in or your own soda, right? So that's why they charge what they charge, because guess what? Y'all pay it, right? Maybe not the movie theater. I'm not one unless I've got like nieces and nephews with me, to buy food at the movie theater. But the ballpark, I'm going to pay an extraordinary amount for a drink or a hot dog. So it's sort of the same thing, is that these people were jacking up the prices because they knew these individuals couldn't get animals or coins anywhere else. So the first thing that Jesus was mad about is how people were being taken advantage of. How the faithful coming to see God were being ripped off, and someone else was lining their pockets at their expense. And it was happening all in the name of religion. But Jesus didn't see much religious about it. The second thing that made Jesus angry is where this market was set up. John tells us that it was in the temple. What we know is that in particular it was in the court of the Gentiles. That's part of the gospel in the New Testament, is how Gentiles came to be included in the faith. Now, that was one thing that Jesus was passionate about, and Paul took up that flag after him to say that all people deserved to stand in the presence of God by God's gift of free grace. So the only place at that time Gentiles could come, before all of that change happened, was this little court in the temple. And that's where these merchants had set up shop. So Gentiles who had come, they believed in God, they knew they didn't have as full access as the people of God. They came all that way, and they had to pray in a stockyard. Y'all ever been to a stockyard? We went to the stockyards once in Fort Worth. And you all know what happens in stockyards, right? They're not very clean places. Let's just leave it at that. That's what the church had become. Imagine if Memorial Hall, which we had taken so much work into, making it beautiful out there. We're not done yet. Got some painting to do. But imagine if I had the bright idea that let's just haul a bunch of cows in there. Just let them do whatever they want to do. And then ask you all to go, well, that's where we have coffee calls, so just find space around the cows. That's pretty much what had happened. So not only was Jesus upset that people were being taken advantage of, he was upset that people weren't made to feel welcome. And that the one place that they were welcomed in the temple had more of a place for cows than it did people. With all due respect to cows. So no wonder Jesus was angry. In short, what the gospel teaches us, Jesus wasn't so much angry about those cows, or the sheep, or the doves. He wasn't so much angry, I think, about the practice of trying to make a convenience for travelers. What he was angry about is that people were being taken advantage of, and that people were being made to feel unwelcomed. Unwelcomed in the presence of God, where Jesus thought everyone should be welcomed. And he meant everyone. People were being taken advantage of in the presence of God, taught to believe that God's favor could be somehow bought. In my confirmation class, what did we learn today? Can't buy God's favor. Grace is a free gift. And I got to thinking that maybe I do get angry more than I think. And again, I tell you, I'm a little more comfortable talking about this in terms of things that upset me. Because I get upset when I see people taken advantage of. And I get upset when people are made to feel unwelcome. And one of the things that upsets me as a pastor is when I hear stories from friends about how people were made to feel unwelcome in a church of all places. And I never thought of it this way, but I find myself using times where I get upset to try to make something good come out. I try to take a situation that might upset me and use that to do something good. I had a situation that I shared last week. So I shared with you last week how I was at Starbucks and how I felt blessed that I had the means that I could buy, $3 worth of coffee. And that when I came out into the parking lot, I met a woman who was looking for bus fare because she said she was a victim of domestic abuse and wanted to get to her mother's in Jefferson. So after I shared that story, which I thought was a good story, I will have you know that I've had at least 3 or 4 people in this congregation come up and tell me that they had met the same woman and they had heard the same story. And so odds are, I'll let you in on a little secret, she's probably lying. And she's gotten money from several of us now. Now all of you here might be looking at me and saying that should make you mad, right? When someone lies to us, we should be upset. We should be angry. That some reason I should be angry that I got taken advantage of outside of the parking lot at Starbucks. And several others of you have, because we believe this woman's story, but she lied to us. But guess what? I have no reason to be upset or angry with her at all, because something is going on in her life. Something's going on that has led her to this position where this is how she's trying to take care of herself. So I can choose, and I do pray that I get to see her again, because now I'm invested in her. I want to find out what is going on in this woman's life, and how can we help besides giving her quote-unquote bus fare. Because that's how grace works. That yes, especially young people, you're not supposed to lie. But sometimes that's what people do when they're in a situation they're trying to figure out how to get through life. So the next time I see her, and I really do hope she shows up at my door someday, or our door here at the church. And guess what? I'm not going to read her the riot act. How dare you lie to me? Which we would probably do in every situation almost, right? That's what we do. But instead, I want to draw on God's grace. And I want to see if good can come of this situation. So instead of getting hung up on the fact that I was lied to, I want to get hung up on this idea of grace and use it for good. And to not be outraged that I was necessarily disadvantaged or taken advantage of, but to be outraged in the sense that I want to do something to help people like this. That's what's always driven my ministry. Besides being the pastor of this church, but being the pastor of souls like this as well. The world has plenty of angry people. So the last thing it needs is one more. And so I'm choosing not to be that one more angry person in the world as best as I can. And I hope that you all join me in this. I hope that we can leave here resolving that there are some things worth getting angry about, just not as many as we think there are. We can root for different rivals in sports, and it doesn't mean we have to get upset with each other. School rivalries can be very angry things. And guess what? We can be on one side of that rivalry or the other, but that doesn't mean we have to be angry about that. can be served the wrong meal at a restaurant. This happens to all of us, right? We can be upset at the fact we didn't get the right food, or our food came out cold, or when we did carry out, they didn't give us something. And we can let that make us angry. That doesn't mean we have to take care or take it out on the server, because people make mistakes. We can disagree on certain things, and God knows all too well that we do. But just because we disagree on certain things and how certain things should be handled doesn't mean we have to be angry and hateful with one another. Doesn't mean that we have to lash out and outrage every time someone says something or posts something that we disagree with. We might have some people who try to push our buttons over the slightest thing, but that doesn't mean we have to let them. I always teach people who are struggling with people pushing their buttons that it's like the nuclear button. I don't know if this is real, but it's in the movie, so why not, right? But whenever you got to fire that missile, it's got the little box, and you got to do the key, and the button's underneath there. But that's how I try to protect my buttons. You all have buttons. But that doesn't mean you have to let people press them every single time. You can put a little control on that. Grace is a great cover and a great key to keep those buttons more in your control, not another person's. Instead, our anger should be reserved for the bigger things in life, like seeing that no person is taken advantage of at the expense of lining someone else's pocket. Like seeing that no person is made to feel unwelcome or unimportant, especially in the presence of God, and especially in this church where we believe that everyone is important, everyone is special, and everyone is welcomed because they are important to, special to, and welcomed by Jesus, who invites us here. And that all persons know how much they are loved by God, and as much deserving of God's grace as we are, and shown the dignity and the respect that they deserve. Grace and peace to you all.